Next on The Professional Rule Breaker.
Hey gang, my name is Dave Bookbinder. I am the author of the new ROI series and host of the Behind the Numbers show. And I love listening to the Professional Rule Breakers show because Kathy is not afraid to tell it like it is. You should definitely tune in, check her out. She is definitely a rule breaker, but for all the right reasons.
So welcome back to the Professional Rule Breaker show. I'm your host, Kathy Walterhouse, and I have to say, I am super excited for my next guest. He's a friend of mine, and he is a business valuation expert. He's a best-selling author. He's the host of Behind the Numbers, which I've been on. That shows in 100 companies, is in the top 2.5 of all programs globally. And he loves serving CFOs and CEOs that want to know what their most important assets are worth. So I want to welcome my friend, Dave Bookbinder.
Hey, thanks for having me, Kath. I'm excited to be here too.
Hey, like I said, I'm happy to have you. I'm glad we were finally able to work out our schedules because it was a little bit of a challenge here.
Never a doubt, never a doubt.
Yeah. I want to start with something a little different this time. I'm going to ask you the question that I ask a lot of people, usually towards the end, because what makes you, Dave, a rule breaker?
Well, in this particular moment, as I said to you before we went on the air here, I am breaking the rules of proper attire for podcast interviews. You look at anything else I've done, I'm normally wearing a collared shirt. But today, because we are on the Rule Breaker show, I decided I was going to break the rules and wear a rock t-shirt.
You should have told me beforehand. I would have put some really funny kind of t-shirt or something on.
Maybe you can do that in post-production. That'd be cool.
Ooh, that's an idea. Maybe I can. I can. Okay. All right. So let me ask you, because I know that you have, I mean, you obviously you're a best-selling author. You have two books. The new one is Return on Individuals, correct?
It's the new ROI, Going Behind the Numbers. The black cover is the new one.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I can't tell you about the second one until I tell you just a little bit about the first one, if you don't
Okay.
mind. So the first one is called the new ROI, Return on Individuals. And it's my journey to prove that people really are a company's most valuable asset. And we can get into the why if you want to later on. But the second book is the new ROI, Return on Individuals, Going Behind the Numbers, which is a compendium of the conversations that I've had on my show, Behind the Numbers, where I've had various guests in different positions talking about their impact, their perceptions, and their experiences in the correlation of people and the value of their businesses. So it's about leadership, it's about culture, it's about valuation, it's about a whole bunch of different things.
So let's go into the why, about why.
Why are people your most valuable asset, or why did I begin the journey?
You know what? Let's start with begin the journey. We'll do that first.
Okay, sure. They're connected, but it may help you for context and help your audience as well. So in my day job, as you mentioned, I'm in the valuation space. So I've helped literally thousands of companies in valuing their businesses and intellectual property assets. And one of those IP assets, or intangible assets, as we call them, that I valued throughout my career was human capital, people. And the backstory is that I never really thought that the methodologies that we use to value people told the whole story, without getting into the weeds and getting all wonky with you guys. But the idea in the methodology that we use is essentially that people are all fungible. We're all the same. We're all replaceable. And one Kathy is worth just the same as any other person coming in off the street. And it never felt right. And there's a lot of pieces that are missing, I thought, from that. And the other piece is that you mentioned, I think, that every CEO mentions that their people are their most valuable asset. Where do you think people are on a balance sheet where all the important assets are? I'll tell you, spoiler alert, they're not there.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, exactly. So when most people think of where people live on a financial statement, it's usually salaries and expenses. So one day I had this idea to write an article about how we value people, needing to be very careful, mind you, talk about breaking the rules, not to throw stones at my profession because I kind of disagreed with the methodology, and not to throw stones at the accounting profession because I disagreed with that people aren't on a financial statement. So That one article turned into a series, which ultimately had to become a book. And that's how the journey began. And they wound up collaborating with about 20 other thought leaders across North America for the first book.
It's really kind of interesting because I've heard CEOs in the past talk about how valuable their employees are, but push comes to shove. Sometimes what they want is they'll try to extract the knowledge that you have and they'll bring somebody in that might be cheaper or I don't know, fit the mold maybe a little bit more. I've seen that time and time again. So it's almost like a little bit of a misnomer. So how do you go about, because I love your idea. I love what you're talking about because I totally agree with you that I always think people are the most valuable asset of what a company has. How do you educate people about that? Because they may say it, but they don't mean it.
Yeah, and I think the word's getting out now. There's a lot of folks who are generally talking about leadership and culture and things that I'll call more of the woo-woo things, right? What people have said to me was that I've helped by giving a language and data to some of these woo-woo topics. I've helped to quantify it, and some of the folks in the HR community have specifically thanked me because they said I've given them a seat at the table to be able to actually have a conversation with leadership about these types of topics. So it's not just about, as we like to say, getting another ping pong table in the break room to create culture. Culture is a whole different matter. But when you start to really peel back the onion and connect the dots, to use two metaphors in one sentence, you find that when you actually start looking at employee engagement, it's driven by leadership, it's driven by culture. And the engagement is what drives all that discretionary effort, the going above and beyond. That's where all the brilliant ideas and innovation tend to come from. And all of those things connect to the value of the business. So
Mhm.
that's really my lens. It's about trying to demonstrate that when you do the right thing fundamentally as a leader, it impacts all those other dominoes, which ultimately impact your business value.
Yeah, absolutely. What it is that you do in a spreadsheet is the value of the people, is it still not there because you can't have it there?
Yeah, I can't break those rules. Unfortunately, I am bound by ethics and formulas and prescribed approaches to do what we do in my profession. So until there's some fundamental changes in some pretty key areas, I can't break those rules. But I do think I'm still the only one in my profession that's actually talking about this subject. And the good news is there's a lot of really empirical data that points to what I'm speaking to. And I was just actually recently on I guess we could call it a podcast with Christoph Gleisch, who is the chief investment officer at Harbor Capital. And they've got an ETF that's driven by this underlying investment thesis that people are your most valuable asset. And they've got some methods of quantification. And they've actually been able to predict outperformance in the stock market based on companies that are doing, I'll say, right things by their people. So there's
Really?
empirical data to point to, and there's more than just that. But yeah, when you start to actually look at it and see it as an investable strategy, even I think the most hardened CEO on the planet who thinks that people really are fungible and who really gives a rip, don't let the door hit you in the butt on the way out, and all
Mhm.
that, if they start to understand that by doing the right things, it actually will increase the value of their business, I think they may tend to lean into that.
Yeah, I think that I would love to see more of that, especially I would say when it comes to sales, because a lot of times it's all about what are your numbers? And you could have, for example, I worked for a company in which we had a small team. I think we had 5 people in our like really small team. And what they did was there was only one person. Doesn't matter if everybody had the exact same numbers, everybody was killing it, everyone was doing really, really well. There could only be one number one and one number two. And their methodology was that anybody that was in a 4 or 5, even though they could be a superstar, like a real superstar, they would get rid of, which
Yeah,
to me was crazy. I mean, lucky for me, knock on wood, I was always in the 1 and 2 all the time. But these people were amazing, really, really amazing. And it was one of those things that it was like the employees, or at that point, they weren't valued. So I love that now there's some quantifiable data that Harbor
yeah.
Capital is bringing forth. Hey there, you know I'm all about making a big difference, making this really big impact. So I am so thrilled to introduce to you today's podcast sponsor. They are the very last U.S. family-owned manufacturer of consumer goods products, products that you use every single day and you run out of them every single day. And on top of that, their products are healthier and safer for you, and they have been made here in the great USA. My family made the switch, and I am so happy that we did. And so is everyone else in the family because the products are amazing. So while these big giant corporations are just getting bigger and so many small businesses are really struggling to survive, why not help me in rooting for the underdog? And you know, I'm all about the underdog instead of these giant 11 conglomerates that control 97% of the North American consumer goods market. So if you're ready to make a difference and switch away to something bigger and better, go to switchaway.com/rule breaker, drop your information, and one of my friends will reach out to you directly. And let's all switch away together to better quality products that are healthier and safer for you and support family owned businesses, because together we can rewrite the business landscape and make a difference one person at a time.
Yeah, when you talk about it's all about the numbers, I chuckled because that really resonates with me. That's one of the things that really annoyed me. I call it management by spreadsheet. So in my world, performance of employees is generally measured based upon some key metrics that we refer to: utilization, realization, how many hours you build during the year, the trading hours for dollars thing, without any consideration for all the intangibles, all the other stuff that somebody else may contribute that doesn't necessarily get reflected in those numbers. And interestingly, that's kind of the genesis of why my show is called Behind the Numbers, because everything that I do tends to be predicated on the numbers. But as you just alluded to, the real stories, the magic, the lessons, they all happen behind the numbers.
I think, at least again, I just go back to my own experience in sales, that I think for anybody that's out there that's listening, if you have a sales team that is reluctant to enter their information, their contact information, what's going on in the account and all that type of stuff, I think there's a bigger picture out there, because all of those people, I can guarantee, because I've had those conversations, I can guarantee is they don't feel valued by whomever is above them in some shape or form, and they feel expendable. And I think when people feel expendable, they're not going to perform as well either.
Oh, yeah, I'm living proof of that. One of my is spoken about and written about that you may not be aware of is I was a single dad for about a dozen years, and I stumbled upon real employee engagement in myself because there were times where I got to work for, I'll call them really great leaders that were empathetic, understood that maybe my circumstances were a little unique. And if I got the call from school that I had to go home and pick up a sick kid, they would say, do what you need to do. Never saying, and oh, by the way, make sure you make it up at the back end. Never, just do what you need to do. And they trusted me. I felt valued and appreciated. And I literally would walk through fire for them. I would do anything for them. And then there were the other leaders, same scenario. I get the eye rolls and the comments. It must be nice to leave at 3 o'clock, like I'm going to play golf or something. They didn't get my best stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's so funny when I'm hearing your story, so many images of some of the things. Like we could just do a podcast on that alone.
Yeah, most people,
That would just go through my head of
most
things.
people can relate to that, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing that popped in my head was at the time my oldest son, his very first basketball game. And I was speaking with the CEO of the company. I had killed it, literally turned this company completely around, had been killing the numbers, was helping everybody across the country negotiate their deals as well. And I said to, he was a fairly new CEO. I said to him, I was like, I'm going to have to go at 6:30 because my son is playing in his very first basketball game. I didn't get the response I thought.
And
I
you're
mean,
already talking about 6:30. It's not like you said you have to leave at 2:30.
right,
I mean, come on.
6:30 in the evening, right?
Come on.
Exactly. And it was not. He got angry that I couldn't talk to him another 30 minutes or something like that. And ever right after that, his attitude towards me changed, which was really interesting. But yet I was the one that had saved the company, quite frankly, and eventually helped it go public. So it's just kind of a crazy, but that's one of many, many. And I think you build loyalty, you build a trust with your employees
Yeah.
if you really value them.
Yeah, you said the magic word, it's trust.
Mhm,
Yeah, if you feel trusted and you feel empowered, you're more likely than not to go the extra mile for people.
mhm. Yeah. I mean, and I think when I had a sales team, I had the best sales team out there. Like they were rocking and rolling and they would literally die for me. But it's because I always made sure when something was important to them, I was the first one to say, what are you doing working? Go. I
Yeah.
didn't care what time it was. Go take care of that. That you're only going to have that experience once. Go. But we
Yeah.
digress. So
No,
I
no,
want,
no. It's important that you talk about that because it's really as fundamentally simple as treat others the way you want to be treated, right?
Mhm.
It's that simple. But when you talk about CEOs, I just got to share this with you quickly, anecdotally. I had a guest on my show not too long ago who authored a book, something to the effect of, "Is your CEO a psychopath?" And he took the deep dive,
Oh
and it
my gosh, what a title.
most CEOs are apparently exhibiting psychopathic behavior. So when you talk about your CEO and the response you got, it may fit that profile.
Hmm. Oh my gosh. Yeah. CEO and I could, besides CEOs, there are a bunch of other people that could probably
Oh yeah,
fit that profile.
oh for sure.
I've told my friends I could probably do a movie of the week for many weeks in a row with the stories that I could tell of things that happened, while I was in the corporate world. And obviously a lot of it was really amazing, like it was super, super amazing, but there were some really crazy things as well too.
Well, when you publish that memoir, make sure you send one my way, please.
I will.
Okay.
I absolutely will. So I want to ask you about valuation for everyone that's out there that is probably not good at evaluating things like myself, I'm sure. Is there a formula? Is there something simple that you can impart to entrepreneurs out there as far as like a rough estimate, like how to evaluate your business?
Yeah. So when you talk about not being good at valuation, the funny thing is that valuation is sort of in our everyday lives when you actually start to look for it. Obviously, the stock market is one. We price shares every day. But individuals, if you're buying something on eBay, you're creating an auction. What's that thing worth to you? So there's a valuation component there. Obviously, in real estate, buying and selling houses, there's a component there that we can all fundamentally relate to. To answer the question, most business owners, unfortunately, according to the stats that I've read recently, don't know what their business is really worth. They haven't gone through the process. It's a shame because valuation is more than just a file stuffer, unfortunately, that some people think it could be, but it's actually a great strategic tool because if you don't know where you are, how do you know where you're going, right? I would caution folks not to rely on rules of thumb and things that you may read on the internet. I just read a formula on the internet where some entrepreneur was telling people, don't waste your time with evaluation. They're expensive and they're complicated, both of which are not true, by the way. But this individual actually was advising business owners to go to some website, grab the EBITDA multiple for your industry and multiply it by your sales number. Let me repeat that slowly. Take an EBITDA multiple and multiply it by sales. It doesn't work that way. If you're going to use an EBITDA multiple, you apply it to EBITDA. If you're going to use a sales multiple, you apply it to sales. So there's a lot of bad information out there. So that would be my short story. I've written a few articles about it. If anybody's curious, they can certainly find some of those things. I'm always happy to have a conversation with people and help them get educated about it. But don't use the back of the napkin. Don't use the back of the envelope methods. Those are not real valuation methods, folks.
Yeah, I would say go get an expert, somebody like Dave that knows what he's talking about. It's, yeah, I almost think like that's almost a non-negotiable.
If you're going
Uh,
to do it right, you have to look at it from a couple different lenses. And if you want, we can talk about how we make the sausage. This is entirely up to you. This is your show.
well, can you give me a quick overview?
Sure. I'll give you a real quick thumbnail. So one, the analogy is to the real estate market, right? What if houses sold for in your neighborhood? That's the first thing you ask your realtor, and they'll
Okay.
give you a list of comps, and then you'll make adjustments to the comps based on proximity to transportation, number of bedrooms, bathrooms. Similar in business valuation. Look at what businesses have sold recently in your industry, and then take a look at the distinguishing characteristics in terms of things like growth and profitability and a bunch of others. That's a market-based approach. The other way to look at it is an income-based approach. And that's really where the rubber meets the road, because it doesn't matter what you did last year as much as it matters what you're going to do next year and the year after that and 5 years after that. So valuation is a forward-looking exercise. So it's the present value of future economic benefits brought back to today's dollars at an appropriate risk rate. So do things that are going to reduce the risk of your business. Run it like a real business, have good systems in place, have good programs, have good people, and all those things will help to increase the value of your business, all the things equal.
Wow, that really was a short version, I'm sure, of really what it is, but that's great. That's really great. I'm curious, what's the biggest surprise that you have come across when you have been evaluating businesses?
The biggest surprise, I
Hmm.
guess that my visceral reaction, I'm going to go with it because they always tell you trust your gut. My visceral response is early in my career when I started working with privately held companies, and some of their data was a mess, their bookkeeping, record keeping was a mess. And I thought, man, when I really get to start working with some of these larger companies, publicly traded companies, I'm going to start to see how it's really done. And then as I grew up in the industry and started to work with those companies, I came to the realization that, you know what, they're not as good as I thought they were. And I'm not trying to paint everybody with the same brush, but you can't say universally just because somebody is larger than you or because they're a public versus a private that they've got their act together any more than you do as a business owner. Oftentimes they don't.
You know what? And that's so true just across the board and just in business in itself. You know, sometimes people really doubt who they are or what they can do because there's somebody out there that maybe has been doing it longer or has an advanced degree or something like that. And
Yeah.
yet that doesn't mean that you can offer something just as good, if not better, as well. So, what has finance taught you about people and
Ah, thanks for that. So what you're alluding to is a video that lives on my LinkedIn profile and one of my YouTube channels. The story there is I was invited to do a TEDx style talk for a finance conference that was called FINEX. It was Finance Excellence, and it was headquartered in Dubai, but it was broadcast globally, so it was a remote thing. They got us a TED talk coach, and we had to adhere to the standards of what a TEDx talk was all about. Data, but not too much, a few slides, but not too much, humor, a story, a big idea. So I got invited to participate in that. And my big idea was that people are assets, not expenses. And what you're referring to is that video where I've done that TEDx style talk that outlines the construct around the new ROI, and people are really your most valuable assets. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
so do you get pushback on that a
Yeah.
lot?
Well, look, you're out there, so you know the story. Once you're out there, you're open for criticism.
Mhm.
And in my second book, I actually had to devote some serious real estate to explaining that line that people are assets, not expenses, because there are folks who jump on that and they say, no, people are not assets. The companies don't own them. How dare you? I'm like, dude, did you read the rest of the story? I'm on your side here. I'm trying to make the statement that in my world, when people think about assets and expenses, you invest in assets, but you try to reduce expenses. So can we agree for this sake of argument and how I'm using the lens here that maybe people aren't expenses? Let's call them assets and they're worth investing in. Oh, yeah. Usually they come around to my side, but yeah, they'll attack that because fundamentally it rubs them the wrong way. And interestingly enough, those are the ones that are struggling in having the
Mhm.
conversations with their CEOs when they're trying to create some new initiatives around employee engagement and team building and things like that.
I can totally see that. That's really the ones that are fighting against it are the ones that are struggling more with whether it's team building or even employee retention, I would say. They're probably really struggling with that.
Yeah, yeah. Get past the label here. Take a little deeper dive before you get critical. But like we said, as soon as you put something out there, that's the risk you take. Generally speaking, the folks that have responded to it respond very favorably. I've got a quote that I never would have imagined would be shared around the world, but it's been translated into multiple languages. People use it as their LinkedIn profile banner. It's on corporate website banners. I've seen it on college curriculum. It's all over the place. So generally speaking, the response has been wonderful.
Give us that quote. I think it's our people are the company's most valuable asset. Is that what it is?
The
Or
value of
I saw
business.
it. I don't remember
Yeah,
exactly off the top of my head what it is.
yeah, sure. It's the value of a business is a function of how well the financial capital and the intellectual capital are managed by the human capital. So you'd better get the human capital part right.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, the end, which is, I love the end, which is a little bit of a zinger into that. And I know
Yeah.
that it's actually appeared alongside quotes like with Warren Buffett and all those.
Yeah, it's crazy. I'm on all kinds of lists with that quote. I try to thank everybody wherever they publish it and acknowledge that they've found it. But I'm absolutely blown away by it. And the funny thing about that quote, Kathy, it came about when the book was first about to launch. I got invited to do a panel in front of several hundred people at a corporate event that was kind of the keynote. And I had some of my collaborators on with me. And I wanted to end the discussion with something that was punchy and not any questions. And I said, what am I going to say? And I didn't know. And I just sort of went into it that night and said, like, please, God, let the words come out of my mouth that sound good. And those words fell out of my mouth. And I've never looked back.
Wow. Isn't that, you know what? It was what you were thinking and you were able to like verbalize it. It's so good that
It's a cool looking Venn diagram too. Financial
it's,
capital, intellectual capital, human capital. You want to be there.
yeah, that's great. That's really great. You should get that trademark. Can you get it trademarked
I
or
didn't trademark that.
copyright?
I did get the new ROI return on individuals trademarked. And I did turn that quote into get this, a refrigerator magnet. One of my colleagues suggested I get a t-shirt. I said, are you kidding me? Who's going to buy a t-shirt with that quote? And she actually said, well, a lot of people probably. I said, you know what? I'll meet you halfway. I'll go small. I got refrigerator magnets that say that quote.
Yeah, I bet you for those company events or things like that, you always get all sorts of things like a t-shirt or a water bottle or something like that. But maybe something like about your quote would be kind of cool too.
Yeah, but I've never intended this to be a monetary thing. I never intended to write either book. It was all just really a passion project about getting a message out there. So the idea of creating merchandise just sort of was an anathema. But when I saw how popular this quote has become, I now use the magnet and give it away with the books when I hand out books.
Oh, that's great. So, what got you started on your show then?
Yeah, so the first book had come out and I was invited to be a guest on some shows at RVN Television. And the owner of the network said that you were kind of an interesting guest. Would you like to be a host? And the people who know me will tell you I'm basically a drink and a microphone away from being a game show host. So when he said, would you like to be a talk show host? I said, hell yeah, let's do this.
That is so awesome. Yeah. And the funny thing is, I think on the surface, you probably wouldn't appear that way. Like this, that you would be the first one to jump up and go, yeah, I'll do it.
And well, I learned to lean into that too along the way. That's one of the things I've tried to impart to some of the younger professionals that I've had the pleasure of mentoring over the years, that sometimes when opportunities come up, your initial reaction may be, oh, that's scary. Oh, I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. I'm not whatever enough. And say that when it shows up, it's there for you and you've got to just say yes and figure it out.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's where I'm going to end the show. That's like a mic drop right then and there. So,
The refrigerator magnet mic drop. I just need to know.
it should be. That's going to be your second refrigerator
There
magnet.
you go. Well, thank you for that.
So, Dave, where can people find you?
They can find me everywhere. I'm all over the place. They can reach out to me on LinkedIn if they want to connect and have a conversation. If they're interested in the show, Behind the Numbers is available at RVN Television. It's on YouTube. It's on everywhere you get your podcast, every platform. And if they want to know anything about the books, they can either go to Amazon or newroi.com.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being a guest here.
It
And
was my pleasure breaking the rules with you. Thanks for having me.
yeah, absolutely. Hey, next time either I'm on your show or vice versa, you're on my show, we need to plan to have
Okay.
something that
Yep.
is,
Coordinate and you do the same band.
you know what? That would make my husband really happy. Rush, not so much for me, but that would make him really, really happy.
I get that a lot. They're not women's favorites necessarily, but there are a few.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, for everybody that's out there today that's either listening or watching, I want to thank you for spending the time with us. And just think about that I mean, there's so much that Dave brought up that are just great nuggets. But I love the last thing he said is when there's an opportunity that comes up and you start doubting, it's there for you. So grab it and go out there, make a difference like what Dave is doing with his show and helping companies with valuation and kind of the way that he's changing the outlook about how people are your most valuable asset. So again, I want to thank my guest, Dave, Bookbinder, and all his information will be in our show notes. And be sure to check him out and take a look at his books as well, too.